Our scripture lesson comes to us from the book of Genesis, chapter 9, beginning at verse 8. Listen for God's word for you. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Angie and I were out of town the last day and got back and saw that there'd actually been a little bit of rain in the last bit, and I take that as a good sign. I'm hoping Thursday we see a good bit more. It's been dry this winter, and I know many of you know that on a more personal level than I do. Steve Calhoun was giving me a hard time. He said, I think I'm going to have to cut back on my giving, because it hadn't rained, and, being that it was my responsibility to make it rain as the preacher. And Gina, I love Gina. She was right there to say, well, what they told me when I was a kid growing up is it meant we weren't paying the preacher enough if it didn't rain. So, she's right there to kind of chip in. I don't know what kind of covenant was made between the farmers and preachers in earlier generations. I know I pray my best for rain, but it's sometimes it's just dry. It's been a season of dryness, and we feel parched. We feel the lack of moisture. We see it as the dust rises so easily with the wind. And maybe the rain will come and nourish the earth again and be ready for crops to grow soon. I sure hope that that's the case. The thing about rain is that rain always, I think, in every rain, there's a taste of judgment. And in every rain, there's a taste of new hope and new life. And we see that. If you've ever been in anything that's like a flood, you realize the devastation that water can bring. And whenever you've been without it, you sure know it. And that water stands as this important place, and rain as an important symbol, not just that we need the rain, but it can be a reminder for us when we're without it, just how dry and parched our souls can be. The dark clouds of judgment that come with the rain in Noah's story, and then the rainbow at the close being a sign of God's covenant. And isn't it interesting, the bow that God rests in the clouds is hung. It's the weapon of the bow is no longer going to be pointed toward humanity, but it's resting in the clouds and the sign of the rainbow of God's turning away from that form of judgment. But in every rain, there still is a bit of a taste of judgment. I don't know if you ever hear her. She's on NPR. She does interviews. Terry Gross is her name. And while I don't, I love to listen to her interviews. I don't agree with her on everything, probably a lot of things. But she was interviewing one of my favorite musicians, a guy named Sam Baker. And Sam Baker grew up in West Texas. And so if there's any place drier than we are right now, probably is West Texas. And he knows what it's like to be dry. And he wrote a song in which he used the phrase that about, it feels like rain's coming. And she's a New Yorker. And so whenever she heard that, it felt like a gloominess, like a darkness was coming. And he said, oh no, when you live in West Texas, when it feels like rain's coming, you realize that's a gift. It's a gift. And it all is in our perspective, isn't it? If you plan a picnic, rain's not welcome. But if you're planting a crop, it sure is. And But there is a gloominess that comes with the rain, and I think it does. It reminds us back to this time of judgment, of God's judgment upon the earth for sin. The flood was clearly God's judgment upon the earth for sin. And there's something that we need to just kind of make sure we all understand. Judgment is good. Judgmental is not, right? There's a difference. We need judges, right? We need people to make judgment. We need to have good judgment in our lives. To be a person who can make a good decision, to make a judgment about what is right and what to do is important. We all make judgments. Now, judgmental is when we begin applying that to people and we cast people in categories of good and bad. Judgmental is a different kind of attitude. But we are called to be people of judgment, and we need to understand that. And God is called to bring judgment upon the earth in our life. And we need to be able to understand the role of judgment. I remember someone saying, we are free to make our choices, but we aren't free to choose the consequences of our choices, right? We can make the choices we want to make. We're free to make that, but we don't get to decide what the outcome of those choices will be. Good judgment allows us to make decisions and have a sense of what the outcome might be. But if we choose to act in a way that's counter to the world, counter to the way society operates, we find ourselves outside what we call the law, right? And that's not a good place to be. We've made judgments that it's appropriate to drive certain speed limits in certain areas. We make judgments that at certain intersections we will put up lights, and when the light is red, it's to stop, and when the light is green, it's to go. We make judgments from day to day. If we choose to go when it's red, it might be okay, but we don't get to decide what happens when we enter that intersection if another car happens to be coming and it's green from the opposite or from the cross traffic. We make our choices in relationship to how the world is. And we don't always get to decide how it will end up. And in our lives, sometimes we live them and we put ourselves at a place of vulnerability of the decisions of others, don't we? When we drive through that intersection and it's green, we're trusting that the cars from the other side are going to stop because it's red. We're trusting that they will use good judgment as well. God's judgment upon our sin is not some evil or some bad thing that happens to us. Although when we find ourselves outside the law or outside of what is to be, we don't like that being called out. It's not a pleasant experience to be, if you will, locked up for disobeying the law. But ultimately, when we make the choice to fall outside of it, the judgment is what naturally will come. The reason to talk about that is because in this story of the flood that comes upon the earth, it's the judgment for sin. And we all know that we have sinned. And we stand in a place where we are before the judge of God to decide our path. We rely upon Christ to appeal to the mercy of the judge. And God grants us grace through Christ. But it doesn't mean then free license to go whichever way we might choose to in our lives. There's certain things that come with consequences. Person smokes for 30 years and then get the diagnosis from the doctor about the health of their lungs. It's not surprising. We may have empathy, we may wish that it were different, but there are certain things in life, if we make choices, there are logical consequences that come. I remember visiting a woman in the hospital, had been diagnosed with lung cancer. The first thing she said to me was, "I know I shouldn't have been smoking all those years. I'm not expecting things to just automatically be okay for me because I've made the choices that I've made." And, we prayed for healing. We talked about how things might be different going forward, but she was not at a place where she was willing to say, I think I get to be free of the consequences of the choices that I've made. And sometimes they're so evident, the consequences are before us. To bring judgment, sometimes it happens on its own path. We as a society, our culture, we are the richest in human history, more affluent than any other society in the history of the earth. Most powerful country in the world, more powerful than any country has ever been in the history of the world. And yet we've created a climate of violence in our culture that we're reaping the seeds, or reaping the harvest of the seeds we've sown. The most violent culture in the history of the world. 19 school shootings this school year. 19. You probably hadn't heard of most of them, I suspect. All over the place. I say this as a person who got my first gun when I was 13 years old. My grandfather gave it to me. I think I probably told you, my grandfather had had a stroke when he was in his 30s, and he couldn't work at the factory he had worked at. And so what he did to help support the family, my dad at 13 went to work to help support the family because his father couldn't work. What my grandfather would do was he would see people list a gun for sale in the paper, and he'd go buy them for cheap, and if they were broken, he was really good at fixing them, and he would set them out on the kitchen table, and he would go through taking them all apart, put them back together, replace whatever parts were needed. Anytime I went to see my grandparents, He would always bring out whatever the latest guns were that he had bought, and he'd show me, here's what's wrong with it, here's how he fixed it, all that kinds of stuff. Gave me my first gun at 13. I say this as a person who has rifles, who has shotguns. I'm a gun owner. I'm not a member of the NRA, I can sure as heck tell you that. But to say that we should be at a place that are on any of the extremes on this issue, it baffles my mind that we cannot figure out that certain kinds of weapons shouldn't be allowed, that certain kinds of screenings should be in place, that certain kind of just additions to guns in terms of how many rounds can be shot, that those aren't things that we shouldn't consider making illegal. They certainly don't fit in any place with the gospel, do they? I mean, what is it that Christ calls us to do? I think there's got to be sensibility. I mean, if you look at the majority of our country, the majority of us, I'm sure, we want sensible answers. Are they going to be perfect? No. We're not going to have all guns removed. We're not going to have, or maybe we will have, I don't know, guns for everybody. Just when you're born, issue you a gun, right? When a young man can't buy a beer, but he can order an assault rifle or can buy an assault rifle, I don't know. It just doesn't seem right. The judgment is what we allow, and what comes by what we allow as a culture. The dark cloud of judgment upon the freedoms that we choose to have and to live with. It's hard. It's hard issues. I'm not pretending it's not. There's no place for sloganeering in it, though. I mean, this is serious. We need serious people to step up with serious answers. And not just, I'm here or I'm here. We got to figure something out. I think God calls us to try to look to create a more just society. When you build your house in the floodplain, it's tragic when the waters rise and your house is flooded. But when you build your house in the floodplain, it seems a logical consequence when the rains come to be concerned about water. Water's the instrument of chaos as a symbol. You look throughout all of Scripture, that when water comes, it comes as chaotic, beyond our control, beyond our ability. Alex and I were at a workshop the other day, and I'd never seen this image before, but it was a picture, I believe it was Honduras, but it was in central South America. They'd built this incredible bridge to go over the river. You may have seen it, but this amazing bridge, and it's sitting going over nothing but sand because there was this huge flood that came, and it moved the river. And it wiped out the roads accessing the bridge. And so now there's this bridge sitting with no road, and the whole river runs right along the outside of this millions of dollar structure that was built. Beyond our control, beyond our chaos. It reminds us that we aren't ultimately in control, but we know the one who is. God got to the point, maybe we should just start over again. Start over. But then he says, never again. I'll find another way. And at the close of it, he gives this beautiful image of the rainbow as a symbol that I'm about second chances. That we have a God who is about second chances. That life is given a second chance. We're given a second chance to get it right, even when we have messed it up. Noah, I'm sure, Noah was 570 years old. or 600 years old when God asked him, right? So why didn't he say, God, why didn't you ask me 570 years ago? Would have been so much easier. But we're given a second chance, a new opportunity. Can you imagine what getting off the boat must have felt like after all that time aboard? I think it must have felt like Easter, a new beginning, a new chance. There are certain days that kind of feel optimistic and new to me, and they come generally around this time of the year. I'd played baseball since I was 6 years old. My senior year in high school, I don't know why, but except I was wanting to get a job and save some money for college, I decided I wasn't going to play baseball my senior year. And I didn't tell anybody. I just decided it in my mind. That's what I wasn't going to. The day for baseball, first day of baseball practice came, and I went out the building from the high school and got in my truck, and it was about 70 degrees. And there was just a light wind, and the air was fresh. And I looked out on the over at the baseball field, and Coach Dewhurst was putting the bases out for ball practice. And I drove immediately home, switched into my ball gear, grabbed my glove, and headed back to the ballpark or the baseball field to play. There are certain times that, it's the feeling is fresh and it's new. And as we move from winter into the beginning of spring, and hopefully the rains come and we see the rainbow in the sky, I hope we can be optimistic about our future. I hope we can be those who will look for the best of what we can be and look for answers of how we can live as a people of second chances and create new opportunity, even out of tragedy. Judgment allows us a new chance. The thing about judgment is you're set free. I mean, once you become truly honest with yourself and with God about your life and where you're at, then you can be free to move forward in the grace that God gives you. As long as you're fighting reality, if you're fighting what's actual in the world and how you live, you're out of sync. You might pretend that you got it all together, but deep in your heart you don't. And when you can get to the place you can say, I know I don't have it together. Lord, help me build the life that you would love for me to have. There's a covenant of God's new life and second chance that we see in the rainbow. I don't know how your parents were or you were as a parent. My dad could be kind of tough sometimes, but he would surprise you with his sense of adventure. I remember we were probably coming from the ball field. I don't remember where we were coming from, but we were all in the car. And there had been a rain, and the rain had just finished, and the clouds were there, and there was the rainbow. And me and my brother started saying, well, let's go find the end of the rainbow. And so he indulged us, and we'd get to an intersection, we'd say, well, turn that way, and then we'll turn that way. And we, kept driving to finally get to the end of the rainbow. And he let us go, as long as we were willing to take part. And chasing rainbows to find the pot of gold at the end is what we hoped. You know what? That rainbow ended right over a Brahms. And he pulled us into the Brahms parking lot. And we went in and got ice cream. And do you know what those folks did? I don't know, I've never seen it in any Brahms before, but they scrounged up some rainbow-colored sprinkles to put on top of the ice cream. Chasing rainbows. God gives us a second chance. Life is full of second chances. And God will indulge us to the nth degree to go chasing them. If we're really serious about finding new paths to move forward. God gives us second chances today. I don't know where you're at in your life, your spiritual journey, but I know that if you're at a place where you've experienced the clouds of judgment, if you're willing to get right and set it right, God's got rainbows ahead of you. God has new life ahead of you. That the judgment comes, the rain will fall, but God gives us second chances for new life. And what is the church anyway, if not a rainbow-chasing community? You need encouragement on the journey? Just look around. There are folks who found the end of the rainbow in their life. They're sitting on the pews beside you. There are people who are searching for that end of the rainbow. They're ready to go on the journey with you if you'll just load up with them and go. Look around. They're all around you here. God invites us to chase rainbows, to see the good, to find new life, and to follow Him. Amen.